For 7 years, the halls of Highgate Manor knew only Shadow's silence and the crushing grief of a ruler of the night. No one dared speak out of turn. No one dared breathe too loudly, until a plump, rosy-cheeked governess choked on her soup and burst into a booming, snorting laugh during a sacred, dead silent grace. If you had asked the prestigious placement firm of Huxley and Cavendish in London, they would have told you Bella Hughes was their most difficult asset to place. It wasn't because she lacked credentials. She had spent years taming the feral children of minor royals and tech billionaires. It was because Bella did not fit the aesthetic of a high society governess. She was 32, unapologetically fat, and took up space in rooms designed for gaunt waifish women. She had thick, soft curves, a hearty appetite, and a booming, joyous laugh that tended to echo off vaulted ceilings. When Bella was offered a staggering £120,000 a year contract to tutor the isolated heirs of Lord Alistair Vane, she knew there had to be a catch. The estate Highgate Manor was located miles off the A171, near the desolate, wind-swept moors of Whitby in North Yorkshire. Her younger sister was recovering from a massive surgery at St Thomas's Hospital, and the crushing medical debts left Bella with no room to negotiate. She packed her oversized wool coats, her favourite shortbread biscuits, and took the train north. Highgate Manor did not look like a home. It looked like a mausoleum holding its breath. When the iron gates screeched open, Bella's taxi driver refused to pull all the way up to the gravel drive, crossing himself before speeding off into the fog. Bella stood in the biting cold, dragging her heavy leather trunk up the stone steps. She was greeted by Mrs. Gable, a housekeeper so pale and thin she looked like a stiff breeze might snap her in two. "You are larger than your photograph suggested, Miss Hughes," Mrs. Gable noted, her voice devoid of any inflection. "The camera takes off £10. Mrs. Gable," Bella replied cheerfully, patting her rounded hip. "The Yorkshire air will just have to make room for me. Where are the children?" The children, 10-year-old twins Leo and Genevieve, were just as unnerving as the staff. They stood at the top of the grand staircase, dressed in immaculate archaic velvet. Their skin was the color of skim milk, and their eyes held an ancient, exhausted weight. Bella immediately felt a pang of maternal instinct. They didn't look frightening to her. They looked starved of sunlight and affection. Over the first week, Bella learned the bizarre, ironclad rules of Highgate Manor. Rule 1. All heavy curtains were to remain drawn until sunset. Rule 2. The dietary restrictions of the house were absolute. No garlic, severe allergies, Mrs. Gable claimed, and all meats served to the family were to be blisteringly rare. Rule 3. And the most vital, absolute, unwavering silence whenever the master of the house, Lord Alistair Vane, was present. Bella didn't meet Alistair until her 5th night. She was in the library, a massive, drafty room that smelled of old leather and damp stone, humming softly to herself as she organized the twins' history assignments. A sudden, terrifying drop in the room's temperature made her stop. The hairs on the back of her arms stood up. She turned and saw him standing in the doorway. Alistair Vane was devastatingly handsome, but it was a cold, terrifying beauty. He was towering, broad-shouldered, with raven hair and sharp, aristocratic features carved from marble. But it was his eyes that made Bella's breath catch in her throat. They were a hollow, endless black, shimmering with a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. Legend in the nearby towns whispered that Lord Vane had lost his wife 7 years ago in a horrific, unsolved home invasion in their private London townhouse. The truth, which Bella would only learn much later, was that Alistair was the king of the Northern Coven, and his mate had been assassinated by the Caldwells, a ruthless rival vampire faction operating out of Edinburgh. Since that night, Alistair had forbidden joy music and laughter within his territory. He existed only to protect his heirs and plot a slow, methodical revenge. "You are the new governess," Alistair said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards beneath Bella's sensible leather boots. He looked at her, his gaze lingering briefly on her soft, rounded face, her full figure wrapped in a thick cardigan. He looked utterly perplexed by her, as if she were a colorful, chaotic painting hung in a room of black and white photographs. "I am Lord Vane," Bella said, giving a polite, albeit slightly clumsy curtsy. "Bella Hughes. The children are highly intelligent, though I believe they could use a bit more fresh air. They remain indoors." Alistair cut her off, his tone slicing through the air like a razor. "You will adhere to the rules, Miss Hughes. If you cannot maintain the peace of this house, your tenure will be incredibly brief." He turned and vanished into the shadows of the corridor so quickly Bella blinked, unsure if he had walked or simply evaporated. She placed a hand over her racing heart, taking a deep breath. He was intimidating, deeply traumatized, and ridiculously demanding. But Bella had dealt with the eccentricities of the ultra-wealthy before. She adjusted her cardigan, narrowed her eyes, and muttered, "Right then, challenge accepted, your lordship." For the next month, Bella waged a quiet, relentless war of warmth against the freezing depression of Highgate Manor. She couldn't open the curtains, but she brought in brightly colored lamps and thick, vibrant rugs to the nursery. She ignored the strict classical curriculum and read the twins' wild, fantastical adventure stories, doing terrible, dramatic voices that made Genevieve cover her mouth to hide her smiles. Bella's sheer physical presence changed the gravity of the house. In a manor filled with ethereal, silent predators, Bella was gloriously, stubbornly human. She hummed while she walked. Her footsteps were heavy and deliberate. When she ate, she actually enjoyed her food, much to the sheer fascination of the twins, who would sit with their untouched glasses of thick, dark, nutritional supplements just to watch their governess enthusiastically devour a plate of buttered scones. But the true test of her survival came on the night of the winter solstice. Mrs. Gable informed Bella that she was expected to dine with the family in the grand banquet hall. This was unprecedented. The staff looked at Bella with a mixture of pity and terror, as if she were a sacrificial lamb being led to the slaughter. The dining room was vast, lit only by dozens of dripping white candles. At the head of the impossibly long mahogany table sat Alistair, radiating a suffocating aura of command and misery. The twins sat stiffly to his right. Bella was placed to his left. Dinner began with grace, but it wasn't any prayer Bella had ever heard. It was an ancient rhythmic Latin chant, led by Alistair, honoring the blood of the earth and the shadows of the ancestors. The rule of the house dictated that during this 5-minute ritual, not a single sound was to be made by anyone else. To interrupt the king's grace was considered a grave insult to the fallen, an offense the Caldwells themselves had weaponized in the past. The room was so silent you could hear the wax dripping from the candelabras. Bella sat perfectly still, her hands folded over her plush stomach. Standing behind Alistair was Mr. Higgins, the manor's impossibly ancient butler. Higgins was practically a fossil, a human servant who had been with the Vane family for 5 decades. He was holding a heavy silver decanter of deep red, viscous wine, which Bella naively believed was just a rich Merlot, but was in fact incredibly rare typo negative blood. As Alistair solemnly chanted the final Latin verses, his eyes closed in deep, painful reverence, the elderly Mr. Higgins stepped forward to pour the drink into Alistair's goblet. Except Higgins was falling asleep. Bella watched her eyes widening in horror as the old man's eyelids drooped. Instead of pouring the red liquid into the goblet, Higgins completely missed. He poured a steady, thick stream of wine directly into the pocket of his own crisp white apron. He didn't notice. He just stood there, swaying gently, confidently, pouring liquid into his own pocket as a massive dark red puddle began forming on the polished stone floor. Bella bit her lip. Don't laugh. Do not laugh. This is a mourning billionaire. You will be fired. Think of the hospital bills. Think of sad things. Dead puppies, tax returns. She looked over at Leo and Genevieve. The twins had seen it too. Their pale faces were perfectly frozen, but Leo's eyes were wide with sheer panic. Then Higgins, completely oblivious, finished pouring, gave a dignified little nod to the empty air, and stepped back, his apron heavily sagging and dripping with red liquid. Squish, squish, squish went his shoes. A tiny high-pitched squeak escaped Bella's nose. Alistair's eyes snapped open. The chanting stopped dead. The temperature in the room plummeted so fast Bella could see her own breath. The Vampire King turned his terrifying pitch-black gaze slowly toward the governess. The air grew so heavy it felt like the gravity in the room had doubled. Bella clamped both hands over her mouth, her face turning beet red. Her shoulders began to shake. She tried to swallow the laughter, but the sheer absurdity of the grim, terrifying lord of the manor being served by a sleeping man with a pocket full of wine was too much. Her soft, heavy body trembled with the effort of holding it back, and then she lost the battle. A loud, booming, unladylike snort ripped through her fingers, followed by a breathless, wheezing gale of laughter. I'm so sorry, she gasped, tears streaming down her face, pointing a shaking finger at the butler. His pocket. He poured it in his pocket. The silence that followed her laughter was apocalyptic. Mrs. Gable, standing in the corner, looked as though she was preparing to plan Bella's funeral. The twins shrank back into their massive oak chairs. Alistair stared at Bella. His eyes flashed a sudden, terrifying crimson red, a detail Bella's brain completely failed to process in her hysterical state. The beast beneath his skin, dormant and grieving for 7 years, bristled at the audacity of this human woman. He looked at the puddle of blood on the floor. He looked at Higgins, who was now awake and staring down at his soggy apron in profound confusion. Then Alistair looked back at the fat, weeping, laughing woman clutching her stomach at his table. She wasn't cowering. She wasn't afraid of his darkness. She was just a woman experiencing an intensely human moment of joy in a house that had outlawed it. The muscles in Alistair's jaw twitched. His hands, gripping the arms of his chair tightly enough to splinter the wood, slowly relaxed. A strange rusty sound echoed in the cavernous room. It was a sound that made Mrs. Gable drop the silver tray she was holding with a deafening clatter. It made the twins gasp out loud. Alistair Vane was chuckling. It started low, a rumble deep in his chest, breaking through 7 years of ice and ash. The chuckle turned into a genuine dark laugh that filled the room, shaking the candle flames. The Vampire King threw his head back, running a pale hand through his raven hair, his sharp fangs fully bared in the candlelight. Another detail Bella, wiping her eyes, somehow rationalized as prominent canines. Higgins, Alistair managed to say, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in nearly a decade. Please go change, before you bleed out onto my grandmother's rug. Right away, my lord, Higgins mumbled, squishing his way out of the room. Bella let out a long, relieved sigh, a warm smile spreading across her flushed face. She met Alistair's eyes across the table. The oppressive, freezing dread in the room had vanished, replaced by a strange magnetic heat. He was looking at her not as an employee, and not as prey. He was looking at her like she was the first sunrise he had seen in centuries. Miss Hughes, Alistair said softly, the crimson fading from his eyes back to a deep, striking amber. Yes, Lord Vane. Tomorrow evening, I believe I will join the children for your story time. That night, everything shifted, but as Bella drifted to sleep in her plush bed, unaware of the glowing red eyes that watched the perimeter of the estate from the tree line, she didn't know that her laughter hadn't just awakened the king's heart. It had awakened his enemies. Word was already travelling north to Edinburgh. The Caldwell family had spies within the Yorkshire local staff, and the message they sent back was chillingly simple. The king is distracted. He has found a new weakness. Winter thawed into a bleak, damp Yorkshire spring, but inside Highgate Manor, a profound warmth had taken root. The heavy velvet curtains remained drawn, and the dietary rules were strictly enforced, but the oppressive silence had been entirely shattered. Bella Hughes had single-handedly resurrected the estate. Dinners were no longer grim, silent affairs. They were filled with Bella's hearty laughter, Genevieve's giggles, and Leo's endless questions about the outside world. Alistair Vane, the fearsome king of the Northern Coven, found himself utterly captivated. He would sit at the head of the table, his dark amber eyes fixed on the Governess, as she passionately debated history or recounted absurd stories from her days nannying for the chaotic executives of Bancroft and Sons Company in London. For Alistair, Bella was a revelation. His world was composed of sharp angles, cold skin, and centuries of calculated ruthlessness. Bella was soft, vibrant, and radiantly alive. When she brushed past him in the narrow corridors, her plush curves pressing briefly against his rigid frame, the heat radiating from her skin felt like a roaring fire to his freezing senses. He found himself listening to the steady, strong, rhythmic thumping of her heartbeat from 3 rooms away, just to lull himself to sleep at dawn. However, Bella remained blissfully ignorant of her employer's true nature. She rationalized everything with aggressive, practical British logic. The fact that Alistair was freezing to the touch, poor circulation, his nocturnal schedule, severe insomnia from grief, the thick, metallic-smelling nutritional drinks, eccentric billionaire health fads. She was happy here. The hospital bills for her sister at St. Thomas's were fully paid, the children loved her, and she had developed a dizzying, undeniable crush on the brooding lord of the manor. But outside the stone walls of Highgate, a storm was gathering. The Caldwell family, operating out of a corporate front known as Caldwell Logistics in Leith, Edinburgh, had confirmed the rumours. Lachlan Caldwell, the ruthless patriarch who had orchestrated the murder of Alistair's wife 7 years prior, saw an opportunity. The Vampire King of the North was distracted by a human, a fat, mortal governess who possessed neither the speed to run nor the strength to fight. To Lachlan, Bella was the ultimate leverage. If they could capture the human and the heirs, Alistair would be forced to surrender the Northern Territories. The trap was sprung on a Tuesday in late October. Bella had relentlessly petitioned Alistair to allow the twins a brief educational outing to the ruins of Whitby Abbey. Just for an hour, right at dusk, Lord Vane, she had pleaded, standing in his study with her hands planted firmly on her rounded hips. The fresh sea air will do them a world of good. They look like Victorian ghosts. Alistair had hesitated. His protective instincts roared at him to lock them all inside the vault, but looking into Bella's warm, determined hazel eyes, he found he could deny her nothing. He assigned his 2 most lethal guards disguised as chauffeurs to accompany them. The evening was bitter and wrapped in a thick, salty sea fret. Bella stood on the dramatic wind-whipped cliffs near the abbey, pulling her heavy wool scarf tighter around her neck, while Leo and Genevieve marveled at the towering Gothic ruins. It was perfectly peaceful, until the chauffeurs suddenly dropped to the damp grass, their throats violently torn open. Bella gasped, spinning around. From the dense fog emerged 3 men in impeccable charcoal suits. Their skin was the color of chalk, and their eyes glowed with a sickening, predatory yellow light. "Well, well," sneered the tallest of the 3, wiping a smear of blood from his chin. "Lachlan said the king had taken a pet. You're certainly a hearty meal, aren't you, sweetheart?" Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in Bella's chest. The man hadn't walked toward her. He had seemingly glided, covering 30 yards in the blink of an eye. This wasn't a mugging. This was something out of a nightmare. "Miss Bella," Genevieve whimpered, clutching the back of Bella's thick coat. Instinct overrode terror. Bella didn't scream. She didn't faint. She realized instantly that these men were unnaturally fast, but she had something they didn't account for: mass and absolute, unwavering maternal fury. "Get behind me. Do not move," Bella barked at the twins. She planted her sturdy, sensible boots firmly into the Yorkshire mud, expanding her broad shoulders to completely shield the children from view. "Step aside, cow," the vampire hissed, his face contorting a set of elongated razor-sharp fangs dropping past his lower lip. "We only want the brats." Fangs, Bella thought wildly. Actual literal fangs. Right, okay, deal with that later. As the vampire lunged forward, reaching a pale, clawed hand toward Leo, Bella didn't shrink away. Instead, she threw her entire substantial body weight forward. She drove her heavy leather handbag stuffed with 2 hardback encyclopedias, 3 water bottles, and a hefty tin of shortbread directly into the creature's face with the force of a wrecking ball. The heavy brass buckle connected with a sickening crack. The vampire, entirely unprepared for a human to fight back with such sheer momentum, staggered backward, his nose shattered. "Run to the car!" Bella screamed to the twins, grabbing a heavy fallen branch from the muddy ground. "Go!" But before the twins could take a step, the air pressure on the cliffside violently dropped. A sound echoed through the ruins, a guttural, earth-shattering roar of pure demonic rage. The fog violently parted. Alistair Vane descended upon the cliff like a fallen god of war. He moved faster than human eyes could track. One moment there was empty space. The next, Alistair was standing between Bella and the Caldwell assassins, his pristine black coat billowing in the gale. Bella dropped her branch, her breath hitching. This was not the brooding, quiet aristocrat who nervously drank tea in the library. Alistair's eyes were burning with a blinding, terrifying crimson fire. The veins beneath his pale skin pulsed with dark, necrotic energy, and his jaw unhinged to reveal fangs far longer and deadlier than the men who had attacked them. "You dare?" Alistair's voice was distorted, layered with a monstrous echo that shook the stones of the abbey. "You dare touch what is mine?" The fight was a massacre. The Caldwell men realized too late that they had not awakened a grieving widower. They had awakened the apex predator of the Northern Isles. Alistair moved with brutal, terrifying efficiency. He caught the first assassin by the throat, snapping his neck with a casual, sickening flick of his wrist. The second tried to flee into the fog, but Alistair was there, plunging a hand directly through the man's chest, tearing his heart out before he could even scream. The leader, the one Bella had hit with her bag, fell to his knees, trembling violently. "Mercy, my king!" The vampire begged, blood pouring from his shattered nose. "Lachlan ordered it. He thought you were weak. Lachlan is dead." Alistair growled, his voice vibrating with lethal promise. "He simply hasn't stopped breathing yet." With a swift, blinding strike, Alistair decapitated the final threat. The ash and dust of the fallen vampires scattered into the salty wind, leaving only silence. Alistair stood with his back to Bella, his chest heaving. His claws were fully extended, dripping with the dark, unnatural blood of his enemies. He closed his eyes, a wave of profound agony washing over him. The secret was out. 7 years he had guarded his children's innocence, and months he had basked in Bella's warm, human ignorance. Now she had seen the monster. He waited for the inevitable screaming. He waited for her to grab the twins and run from him in sheer terror. Instead, he heard the heavy, deliberate crunch of her boots on the gravel. Bella walked right up behind him. She was shaking, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she did not stop. "Lord Vane!" Her voice trembled, but it held steady. Alistair flinched. "Do not look at me, Bella," he whispered, the monstrous echo fading, leaving only the broken, exhausted man beneath. "I am a nightmare. I am a killer of the dark. Please, just take the children back to the car." Bella stepped around him, forcing herself into his line of sight. She looked at his glowing red eyes. She looked at the blood on his hands. She thought about the strict allergies to garlic, the drawn curtains, the heavy silver goblets of wine. Suddenly, every bizarre rule of Highgate Manor clicked into perfect, terrifying place. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a thick linen handkerchief, and firmly took one of his massive, blood-soaked hands in hers. Alistair gasped, staring down in shock as the soft, plump woman began meticulously wiping the gore from his knuckles. Her skin was so warm, it burned through the icy dread in his soul. Well, Bella said, her voice dropping into her usual practical, no-nonsense tone, though tears of relief were sliding down her rosy cheeks. This certainly explains why you never wanted to share my shortbread. Honestly, Alistair, you could have just told me you were a vampire. I've worked for tech billionaires. I'm used to bloodsuckers. Alistair stared at her, utterly paralyzed. The crimson faded from his eyes, returning to a stunned, soft amber. You are not afraid of me. You just saw me tear men apart. I saw you protect your family, Bella corrected gently, looking up into his eyes. She reached up her soft, warm palm, cupping his freezing marble-like cheek. And I saw you protect me, though for the record I had the first one handled with my encyclopedias. A sudden, breathless laugh escaped Alistair's lips, the same rusty, beautiful sound he had made in the dining room months ago. He dropped to his knees in the damp grass, wrapping his arms around Bella's thick waist, burying his face in the soft, warm curve of her stomach. He held her like a starving man who had finally found sustenance, shaking with the overwhelming relief of being known and being loved anyway. Bella stroked his dark hair, looking over his shoulder to see Leo and Genevieve cautiously stepping out from behind a stone pillar, their small faces lighting up with hopeful smiles. The Caldwells of Edinburgh were decimated a week later in a swift, brutal strike commanded by the king himself. But Alistair Vane did not return to the shadows. Highgate Manor's heavy curtains were finally pulled back to let the dusk light in. The cold, empty halls were filled with the booming, joyous laughter of a governess who refused to make herself smaller for anyone. And the vampire king of the north never went another day without a smile, forever anchored to the light by the warm, fierce heart of the woman who dared to laugh during grace. If you love this story of the Vampire King and the fearless governess who brought light back to his dark world, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a dark romance with a curvy, unapologetic heroine, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic, and romantic, real-life inspired storytelling. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an update, and let us know in the comments what kind of story you want to hear next.